Parent Entrepreneur Power, conversation number 203.
Parent Entrepreneur Power.
Wait, what? It's Mama Power!
This is the podcast for parents juggling the tough choices required for success in business while putting family first. Hi, I'm Mary Catherine Johnson, and I share the ups and downs and dirty truths of profits and potty training while chatting with successful parent entrepreneurs from all walks of life. Are you powered up? Hey there, Power Parents. Guess who? Mary Catherine Johnson here, and I get to chat with someone that I was so fortunate enough to be introduced to in the fall of 2017, and he was gracious enough to say yes when I asked him to come on the podcast, and this is David Burkus. He is the author of Friend of a Friend. Hey there, David. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
It's a gorgeous, gorgeous day. How could I be doing anything but fantastic?
There you go.
Know, I woke up today. What more, right? Everything
That's
else
true.
is gravy.
Everything else is gravy. Yeah.
Yes. So I'm really excited you were able to join me. I know we've chatted here and there and off and on mic and, just in each other's worlds on the outskirts of them. But I really just want to say thank you so much for joining me. And for allowing me to grace your mic with your summit last fall. We want to start this off the same place we always start, which is your once upon a time story. So those in the audience who might not know who you are, as well as I do, tell them a little bit about how you got into this whole parenting and entrepreneur gig.
Yeah. So once upon a time, I was a really, really dedicated and focused person to whom a lot of accidental things happened. That's the really short way about it. When I was growing up, I obviously wanted to be a parent, right? Because you want to grow up and have a family and all that sort of. But like the other thing is that I wanted to be a writer in some capacity. I was that nerd in working for the school newspaper and the literary magazine and doing all that kind of stuff. And went to university to study English and specifically to study creative writing. And in that time, I learned a couple really interesting things, which is it struck me that the bulk of the professors that I was learning from did have books inside of the sort of fiction creative writing genres, but they weren't all that successful. And if it weren't for their being a professor, they wouldn't be able to eat. And so I started thinking, this is not a path that I think I want to go down. And around that same time, this was when, so I was at school when, at least I should probably look this up because I always say this, but I never actually look up the pub date. But I tell myself that I was at school when Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point came out. It might have come out in like paperback. It might have been the 14th edition. I don't actually know when his book came out. But somewhere in my sophomore year, late sophomore year, I read that book and I thought, wow, this is really interesting. Like he's an amazing storyteller. Like I've read novels this year that are worse than this, right? So and I was also fascinated by like the social science thing. And so I had a couple conversations with people that were in different psychology and communication and sociology majors. And I ended up adding a second major in organizational communication. Not straight psychology because it was too hard to overlap those two degrees. But basically my idea was like, this is really cool. And I think it'd be fun to write about this. I also started to notice that people who write more nonfiction and business related concepts are able to actually build sort of a whole business around those concepts and they don't starve. And so that seemed like a really good model and a really good plan. So of course, then I graduated and I went right out and I did that and was hugely successful right off the bat, which is not what happened at all.
I was gonna go, okay, wait a minute.
I know, right? Exactly.
How did I miss that one?
So while I was an undergrad, I'm one of those weird ones. While I was an undergrad, I met a girl and we got married the day after graduation, like everybody does, you know. And she wanted to go to medical school. And so it was like, okay, well, again, there's that whole eating thing. So I ended up working in the pharmaceutical industry for about 6 years. And always kind of pursuing and building the platform and doing a little bit of like article writing and that kind of, knowing that this is what I wanted to do sort of one day around the road, but that it would also have to sort of wait, right? And so a couple different things happened. The biggest one being that in 2009, or maybe it was 2008, but it took effect in '09. But around 2009, the Affordable Care Act passed, which does some great things, did some weird things, but disrupted the pharmaceutical industry is an understatement, right? And so I started to think, okay, well, I should probably develop some exit plan. And I looked at my growing sort of ethos as a writer, speaker type person and thought, okay, well, that's not ready yet. So what do I do? What do I end up doing? And this is where the whole story gets really ironic. I ended up becoming a professor because I had gone to graduate school for organizational psychology. I had degrees that that my alma mater actually liked. The thing I forgot to tell you is that my wife is the daughter of a professor. So I was always sort of in and around the faculty because they were at his house at times and whatever. So it was a really interesting transition. I became an accidental academic. And what I learned is that it's a phenomenal business to develop a side hustle, or a phenomenal job to have to develop a side hustle and grow it. Because as soon as I became a professor, I had the time and space to build out this whole business of me. And so I did that, and things started humming really, really smoothly. I got the first book deal, which was and started getting paid to actually speak and do all of the things that you dream as you're trying to build out this platform. And then just to go with the accidental theme, around the same time I got the book deal, we found out that our first child was coming. And so literally within about 6 months of each other, our son arrived and the book came out. I remember actually watching him sleep, writing certain passages of it and that kind of stuff. And so fast forward, after a couple years of trying to spin all three plates, I ended up just dropping the university life. So I still keep an appointment there and I teach a class there, but I don't do a full load, anything near a full load there. I'm mostly focused in on me and the kids. And the coolest thing ever happened to me you'll like this if it's Parent Entrepreneur podcast. The coolest thing happened to me the other day. I watched as we were at some party and somebody asked my son, my older son is 5, asked him, "What does your dad do?" And he said, "He makes books, he gives talks, and he takes care of us." And I thought, oh my gosh, that's so cute. I would have preferred the third one be the first one, he said, but hey, whatever.
Yeah. As long as it's in there, right?
Yeah, as long as it's in there. And I was like, yeah, that's pretty much my day-to-day life is focused in on those three things.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, I've got to say this. So, accidental academic, is that a different kind of AA group?
It feels like the same one. Yeah, I feel like
I had to do that.
So I called myself an accidental academic for the entire time. I was a full-time professor for 6 years. And I called myself an accidental academic for all of that time. And then actually, ever since I stepped out of the tenure track role into this other appointment of for faculty in residence, or I actually don't even understand how it all works, but that's academia for you. It's a 1,000-year-old business model. I started referring to myself as a recovering academic. So we're even further into the AA.
I just knew it. I just had a feeling based on the way you described the professors when you were going to college and then accidentally coming into the profession yourself, that it had to be AA. I mean, it just fits.
I will say this is really mean, but I will say that in the United States, the English programs of the 3,000 plus universities in the United States are undoubtedly overwhelmed with people who to some extent settled and who just thought this is a way safer gig than trying to get my work out there. And so I'm going to hang out in here. Now, that's not everyone. There are some amazing writers and thinkers and all that sort of stuff that also work in academia. But in particular, they were not the right role models to model myself after if what you wanted was to build a business that was essentially sort of me Inc. Right? They know how to be employees. They're really good at that. They know how to some extent get their work out there, but how to build a business around it didn't really get a lot of help from them in that regard.
So I see, and I'm sorry, I just have to put this out there as well. I see a synergy happening. There's another interviewee that I did, Isaac Morehouse, and his company is called Praxis. And basically that company is an alternative to college for young people. And so I see you having the opportunity, or someone like you having the opportunity to allow young people who have that dream to actually learn how to create Me Inc. rather than go to college and get the degree and settle if that's what they're being taught. And I have to also put a plug in here and say, Evan, my wonderful podcast editor, listen up, because his degree he's going after is creative writing. So
I'm sorry, Evan. No, and again, it is.
no,
I mean, I
know.
I learned some amazing things about storytelling and how to. I mean, literally, I think the reason that my books do well is that I'm emulating that sort of Gladwellian style. Gladwell also learned it from studying English and from being a long form narrative journalist for 10 years, right? Mm-hmm. So there's definitely lessons to learn. The thing that you're not going to learn is how do you build a business model around what you're going to do. And unfortunately, in 2017, there are not a lot of really fun, great jobs for people who are skilled writers, but there are great opportunities to build some sort of business around it. So yes, by all means, study that, learn it well, learn the craft, but just because you know the craft doesn't mean you know the business.
Well, and that's the exciting part as well, because he is definitely knowing the business, having created one himself. So yes, I get it. I understand. I just had to have a little bit of fun there. And also to say, what an amazing trajectory. I mean, really.
I mean, thanks. It was most of it was a grand accident, but thank you.
Yeah, but that's kind of the way life happens. And the other thing I wanted to point out too, which is also very common for many of the people on this podcast, is that usually their baby and their business are birthed relatively at the same time. It's really crazy how that happens.
Yeah, well, and one of them is usually an accident, because I don't think you would do that to yourself on purpose.
You know, usually both of them are accidents.
That might be true too.
So that's really amazing. So it's basically like you had twins, because building a business is just like having a baby, right?
So I say this to my wife, and she rolls her eyes that like we have 2 kids, but I have 4 kids because I have 2 books. And she totally rolls her eyes.
Watch
I don't know that the process of writing a book is anything like the process of growing a child inside yourself. But mentally it feels that way. It's physically it's not for sure.
We'll let you just hold on to that one.
Let me keep lying to myself about
totally
that one.
Fine. I'm not your wife, so I can say, sure, go ahead, have fun with it. But yes, I get it. But it really is that process of thinking about it. I mean, if it's not accidental, right? Thinking about it, figuring it out, that whole, both of my businesses, both, I'd say 3 of my businesses basically took around 9 months to come to fruition, to actually get paying clients and blah, blah, blah. The latest business didn't. The latest was like, wham, bam. Okay, let's just put it that way. It was just, you're doing this and that's all there is to it, and you're going to be successful immediately, which again is totally accidental. But it has to do with storytelling. So let me ask you, because you are an amazing storyteller, and I know some of the other things that you have and that you've done, which I'd love for you to touch on, how do you think your storytelling is being adapted to some of these new mediums, like texting, like LinkedIn, like Twitter, and like, of course, Facebook Messenger?
Yeah. So admittedly, I have not experimented with Facebook Messenger. You actually you put a bug in my head about that, and I just haven't had time to let that grow out of larvae stage. But I have seen several people do that. You know, I think that the normal model is that a lot of times those are mediums for getting the word out about whatever the longer form thing that you want is. I will say the amazing thing to me, though, is that in all of those technologies, blogging and communicating long form via sort of email, newsletter, et cetera, is not dead. In fact, there's actually some evidence that from a blogging or article writing standpoint that like longer form content does better, right? Over time, right?
Yes.
Your listicles will get lots of hits in the week after they're published, but like the long form stories do better. And I think that's a testament in the swarms of all of these new technologies that the ones for which storytelling can still thrive meaningfully are the ones that are lasting. You know,
yes.
The irony, of course, now is that like Facebook is copying Snapchat, and they have this whole thing called My Story, right? And it's really not. It's my ripoff of Snapchat, but. But yeah, it's interesting to me that even in that, and I think there's something sort of human to that, right? All of these technologies are meant to bring humans together. Actually, let me take that back. All of these technologies are meant to get humans to click a button, but they do that by bringing humans together. And so it makes perfect sense to me that, again, the long form, more narrative driven mediums are doing better over time than anyone would have thought.
Definitely. And it's really just an adaptation, really. You're still taking that same long form story and you're just breaking it up into bite-sized chunks and letting people take their own adventure through it and choose their own adventure through it. But I agree with you 100%. That copy, that long copy, is longer lasting because more people can sit and, sip a cup of coffee reading it rather than have to rush through it. And we'll share those kinds of pieces more than the rush through versions. So I agree 100%. All right. So, storytelling, I could talk to you all day. Love your sense of humor, love your communication style. So again, I'm going to have to watch the clock and make sure that I keep myself on task here. But so you started having the kids. You say your oldest is 5 now, right?
Yeah, so I have 2 boys. They are 5 and 3.
How has your business building morphed as they grow?
I mean, for the first 3.5 to 4 years, it was, utter total chaos. So I don't know. I mean, morphed is probably a good term. It's sort of like, it reminds me of, I don't know if you ever saw the movie The Blob.
Oh yeah.
But it kind of reminded me of that. And then the smartest thing I ever did for both business building and for being a parent is I started trying to do less. And a lot of that was in late 2016. I finally got around to reading Greg McKeown's Essentialism. And then I read a second book right after that. And I'm doing whoever wrote that a disservice because I don't remember which one it was. But it was another book along those lines of like, do less, but do it better. Mm-hmm. And that really made me think like, okay, all right, I got to start cutting things off. And I went on kind of a crusade to cut a lot of commitments off. The last one, of course, being my other job. But I went on sort of a crusade, and it brought me to a much happier place. I mean, 2017 was our best revenue year. In fact, I can even say "our" because I hired an assistant who works with me part time. Actually, not an assistant. I call her my chief of staff. Yes. Because there is no staff. Yeah. But if there ever were staff, she would then be the chief of them, and it would probably be her job to figure out who those staff are because I wouldn't want to deal with it. Yeah. So, we had a lot of success sort of because of that. And then the more important thing is I enjoy every day and don't feel there's a couple. There's always going to be days where you feel overwhelmed and stressed, but I have far less of them now. I mean, my average day now is I wake up somewhere between 5:30 and 6:15 because my kids wake up ridiculously early. Mm-hmm. And I hang out with them and we get breakfast and we brush our teeth, we get breakfast, we get dressed. I drop the first one. He's in school now. So there's a school bus that comes at around 7:30. And then we come back to the house. Usually the 3-year-old comes with us to drop him off because it's just fun. Mm-hmm. Then we come back to the house about 8. And around that time, one of two things is happening. Either my wife, who is an ER physician and is now waking up because she probably worked later into the night or whatever most days, or my mother actually is our nanny. Or the nanny shows up at around 8. And then I come down into my basement where I'm recording this now. It's a nice basement though, like windows and all that. It's not like I'm not like huddled in this cement
creepy,
corner.
Dark, yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I go down into the basement where the office is and I work for about 2 hours. And then I jump off and run off to the gym and beat the lunch rush crowd. And then I come back and I have lunch. And then usually I do the deep work. So the writing part happens in that morning session. Mm-hmm. Then I run off to go to the gym. And then the afternoon is all the sort of biz dev stuff. So it's the calls with potential speaking clients. It's the podcast interviews like this one. It's all of that sort of stuff. And then by about so my mom, who's again is our nanny, is the one that picks them up from the bus and that sort of stuff. But somewhere between 4:30 and 5 o'clock, I come up and we start making dinner, and it's an awesome life. That's my average day when I'm not on the road. When I'm on the road, then all the craziness and stress and all of that sort of stuff happens. Mm-hmm. But that took 18 months of hacking away at just other stuff that turned out to not be all that useful for producing revenue, not be all that useful for growing sort of the audience, which is, there's a direct correlation between how many people are aware that I exist and how many speaking gigs and book sales and all that sort of stuff happens. So you can tend to think that you've got to be around in all this stuff. Turns out you don't, right? And so that's been a really cool lesson that I've learned over the last sort of 18 months when the morphing stopped and we started shaping this thing into what do we want this to look like.
So I've got to take that a little deeper because thank you so much for that. It is so very true. Less is more, really. We all think we have to multitask and get all kinds of things done. And a lot of these books, one of my favorites is The One Thing. And it really, a lot of these books.
That might have actually been the other book, by the way, now that I'm thinking about it.
Oh, wait, you think it is?
The other book that I don't remember, but that might have been it.
Yeah, it's an amazing book. So, but they all tell us that, but we superhero solopreneurs, as I like to call us, or what I used to be, we think we can do it all and we just have to do it all because we really can't afford to pay that other person. And we just want to take all the money for ourselves and we've got bills and the spouse is bugging us to pay off the credit card and, blah, all that stuff, that craziness, that anxiety, it just fuels us to think we can do more, be more. And we can't. We absolutely can't. And when we let go of many of those things, is when the magic really happens and we really start to see an amazing trajectory. So take me a little deeper in that. Can you just give me one thing that you used to think you had to do that you have now gotten rid of and it has actually helped you grow your business more?
So one of the obvious ones, because we were talking about it earlier, is the social media aspect. So I spend far less time on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. And I actually used to be on several other services and I shut them down because this was an amazing thing that I did. I actually looked at my Google Analytics. You know what I mean?
Oh my
weird,
goodness.
right? Instead of just installing the little pixel 7 years ago and then ignoring it and thinking I'm a good internet person, I actually looked at it. And what I found was that really the only consistent sites that were driving any traffic back to my site were Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And actually LinkedIn was about half of what Facebook and Twitter was, right? So it killed the Instagram, and I don't even remember what the heck else I was on.
Snapchat and anything else.
I was on Snapchat because I'm, over 30, so that would be creepy. But it sort of killed all of those. I looked at data on what I wouldn't consider this social media, but it sort of is. There's a lot of when you're a writer and you have a couple books and you're writing for Harvard Business Review and that kind of stuff, there's also a lot of sites that will hand you the keys and just trust you, right? Mm-hmm. So Forbes and Huffington Post and several other sites have sort of these contributor blogs where you can just write whatever you want, right? Whenever that's the appropriate medium, you can sort of write that article. And I looked at Google Analytics and I found that literally HBR was the only one driving any real traffic to my site. So I was like, all right, well, I'm not going to worry about the rest of them, right? So it was really cutting a lot of that. I guess it's not social media then. It's sort of overall online activity. It was taking a very deep dive on, for me, it's pretty simple. People come to my website for one of two reasons, right? They either are trying to figure out who I am, and if they are just trying to figure who I am and what the ideas are, then I'm trying to drive them to buy a book, right? Mm-hmm. And they're coming to me because they're thinking, okay, who is this person? I've heard he's a decent speaker. Maybe we're trying to have and so I'm trying to get them to essentially contact us for an inquiry for speaking. Those are the only two things I'm trying to make them do, right? Mm-hmm. And so only the things that are driving traffic in those two lanes matter, mm-hmm. right? And nothing, and the other stuff sort of doesn't, right? When someone reads this random rant that you put on Huffington Post because you're trying to newsjack, which is a fancy term for paying tons of attention to what's going on that exact day and then scrambling to put 500 words of your thoughts on that issue up, you get some traffic. That traffic doesn't stay. That traffic doesn't buy a book or fill out a speaker inquiry form. So that traffic doesn't matter. We did away with it.
Yeah, you're talking about content management, basically. You're just talking about the content that you produce. Where is it serving both you and your audience best?
Right. Yeah, mostly me. But yes.
Well, of course, exactly. Because that's what your audience is doing, right? It's supporting you.
Yes, but I consider myself a writer first, right? So I want to get the book in people's hands because I've spent 3 years and 60,000 words thinking through some idea, right?
Right.
And so in the way that I best serve the audience is I drive them to go, look, that article's great, but you really need to dig into this because I don't have time to convey all of those things in 700 words, right?
Right.
So you really need to check this out. And so, that feels really self-serving, but you're right, it really does serve the audience too, because you're not going to get the full story, the full unpacking of the idea unless you take that deep dive.
And you, when you were talking about the books that impacted you, you didn't talk about the Harvard Business Review article. You talked about the book and the author and how it changed, again, your trajectory or impacted your life. So yes, it's about you in the sense that you are the author and you're sharing these ideas, but really it's a human condition you're talking about, and it can relate. We can all relate to it. But of course, whether or not we relate to your words versus the one thing or another book basically comes from whether you speak our language. And that's the way someone understands whether they want your book or not, is reading your 700 words on Harvard Business Review. And then, yeah, I get it. He speaks my language. I love his humor. I love the way he unrolls something for me or unpacks it for me. And then, yeah, what else does he have to offer? And someone else could see that same article and go, ooh, no, not my gig, and go on to somebody else. And that's
right.
That's
and it's okay because it's not for you. Yeah,
that's right.
No, and you're exactly right. Like no one, I don't know. Maybe these people exist. I think they're probably pretty shallow. I've never heard someone say, "Oh, I read this article on HuffPo and it changed my life."
Yeah.
Right. What I have heard people say is like, oh, I watched this TED Talk or I read this HBO article and I clicked over and found out more, bought the book, and the book changed my life, right?
That's right.
Books, documentaries, or those, like the longer form is what people say changes their life, right? Not the little short thing. So all of those other short things should only be in the service of pointing to that. And sometimes they're not. And when they're not, cut them out of your business. They're not doing any good.
Amen. Yes. And it brings us right back to, again, those other forms. We were talking about Messenger, all those things. I agree 100%. Yes. If there's no substance there, it doesn't matter the length.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And that's the one. So one of the, speaking of sort of the author speaker business model, one of the people that has really sort of mastered this in terms of Facebook Messenger, because I know this is also your thing, is John Acuff does a really good job of this. And essentially, he's just treating it as a micro newsletter. So you almost, the messages that you get from him almost assume that you've already been on a journey with him. Right. They're not, hey, read this, buy this thing. It's more like, hey, because you're already part of the family, this is an easy way to stay in touch. Exactly. And I think there's something to be said for that. And I think nobody treats most of their social media accounts that way. And we probably should.
Yes, definitely. I agree. It has to be an adventure, and sometimes it's the adventure, and you can create any of those adventures. But this isn't for me to talk about Messenger. I'm just so passionate about it. It's just not even funny. So I'll get off of that. But yes, I agree with you, John Acuff. I agree. He's doing a great job with it, and there are a few that are doing a really good job taking that short story and turning it into an engaging medium that gets people deeper into their world and understand exactly what they have to offer. So I'm sure that so tell me a little bit more about, so you've talked about, and thank you for the idea on what you cut out so that you can now progress, because that's what we're all looking for. At least hopefully, if you are not going away from your fear or letting your fear control you. David, we call ourselves power parents. And the reason we're power parents is because if we have taught a kid or if we've brought a kid through potty training, business is nothing. We got it. We can do anything. That's our superpower. So we're power parents. So power parents, and if you actually are looking to stop being a superhero solopreneur and actually want to grow and get a chief of staff, then listen up and look at your business and see what you can cut out, and look at your Google Analytics. Oh my gosh, please do. Because they can tell you amazing things. So
and I should also say that getting a chief of staff is part of cutting it out, right? Looking at, and for me, it was, my thing was always, there's a ton of people that are all about VAs and personal assistants. I didn't necessarily want one of those because I'm a control freak. But I had, what had to happen for me was, I had this former student who did a couple freelance projects for me, and I thought, man, it would be awesome if I could hire her. Of course, I don't have 40 hours a week worth of stuff, and I also don't want a virtual assistant who doesn't sort of like know me, right? And what ended up happening was I started asking her questions about who her other freelancing clients were. And one of them I found out that I knew. So I called him up and I said, hey, I have an idea for you. Like I need somebody, but I don't need them 40 hours a week. You're using her for a bunch of different projects. I bet you need somebody too. What if we split her? Yeah. And that's literally what we did, right? But it took some thinking outside the box. And it took, again, that happened not because oh, I'm making all of this money now or whatever. It happened because I was on a conscious crusade to cut away unessential things, and outsourcing them to an assistant who could handle a lot of it. It was part of that.
And let me ask you, have you ever had to have an occasion where you had to look around and find something for her to do once you hired her?
No. So the way that we work, she is a contractor. So because she's not full time, but also it's very project based. So you were on the Super Connector Summit, which was our fall project, right? We're moving into right now. There's nothing for December, and then we're moving into the book launch project. That's about a 6-month project, and there's sort of an assumption that it'd be about 20 hours a week of work, but projects ebb and flow. And so I haven't really ever found something to do because it's always much more about the long-term project and getting sort of that done. And if there's nothing to do for that week because we're still waiting on something, or usually I'm the bottleneck, then whatever. That's part of the ebb and flow. It'll sort of come out in the wash. Again, to use the summit that you were part of as an example, there was not a lot to do. And then all of the interviews started happening. So there was a lot of editing to do. And then the thing went live. So then it was crazy town. And now there's not a lot to do as we're closing out. Right. I mean, literally her kind of task right now is to make sure that not a lot of people want a refund after they've watched all of the talks. Right. So, there's not, so it ebbs and flows. And so, I haven't.
And that's the business she wants. That's the type of work she wants.
Yeah, exactly.
She's a project person, and she's good with that. She's not looking for a steady 20 hours a week, just do the same thing day in, day out kind of job. Right.
And she does the same thing with a friend of mine who sort of grabbed the other half of her capacity, and that one ebbs and flows too. I will say there have been a couple times where it's obvious both are spiking at the same time, and then we have to talk about paring something down. But the inverse hasn't really happened, or if it has, she's doing a really good job of looking busy.
And as long as she can pay her bills, hey,
yeah.
I hope.
No, I mean, this is I think exactly what she wants to. I mean, she was there's a whole little thing we could go into that, but essentially, she was an employee too, and I had to draw her on this whole no, being a solopreneur is amazing and you should be one, and I'll be your client for 20 hours a week. Yeah, right. Definitely. And then once that happened, a very similar transition happened for her.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to look for one of those because the person I was using to do that is I'm needing to put into another role. And so I'm going to need to do that. And that is an amazing idea to possibly split a person. And I know several people who also need someone of that capacity. And I'm assuming this person is not necessarily a jack of all trades or a Jill of all trades, but kinda.
Sort of, yeah. I mean, most of the projects that we work on are very digital, and there's stuff that I could do if I wanted to, but it would take more hours, and the end result would be worse. Mm-hmm. And so, we'll say jack of all trades when it's digital. I don't know that I would ever send her off to go give one of my speeches, right?
Yeah,
but when it comes to those sort of aspects, website, the video editing, she was editing my podcast when I had a podcast, all of those kind of things. I could do them, but she's better at them. And then the other thing is that, again, I know that there are people out in the space that are all over VAs and digital assistants and people you never meet. But again, to me, what was really important is that I knew her for 5 years. I taught her in classes when I was the accidental professor. And then she started doing freelance work for me when she graduated. She had a job, but then she was still doing some other sort of freelance stuff. So it was a way easier transition. There was none of that risk of oh, I really need this, but I don't want to have some random person from a country that I'm not aware of and I don't even know who they are. They're just an email address and all that. I
Oh,
totally
yeah.
understand all of those concerns that a lot of people have, and I had them.
Hmm.
It just it takes a lot of thinking outside the box because I think most people look at the binary choice of hire somebody for 40 hours a week as a full-time employee and then waste many hours because there's nothing for them to do, or use a VA from a country that who's you don't even know. There are other options there. You just have to get creative.
Perfect. That's exactly right. Just like your situation with your kids, getting
Yeah.
creative and having the nanny and getting up in the mornings and picking up from the bus and then getting dinner ready. I mean, it's life, and life does not have to be the cookie cutter. Go to work at 8 o'clock, come home at 5 o'clock, and you're done.
Yeah, I mean, the trick is I think work-life balance is stupid, and I think
Yes.
work-life balance is for people who do that cookie cutter, leave at 8, come back after 5. And it is more, there's a big block over here of employee and a big block over here of parent, and you are trying to sort of balance them. You go the entrepreneur route, it's a whole lot easier to do work-life integration, right? Where I work for a few hours, then I do life, then I go back to work for a few hours, then I do life, right? There will be a day, I don't know when it will be, but there will be a day when they sleep in past 5:30. And thanks to them, I'll continue to wake up at 5:30 for the rest of my life. I figured out, by the way, this is how I used to always marvel as a child how old people woke up so early in the morning. And now I figured it out. It's the kids, and the kids just ruin them and they never get back to sleeping in. So, that'll be
true.
it'll be even more integration when I have 2 hours before they even wake up to work with,
Definitely. Oh my goodness, yes. Yes, that's exactly right. Power parents, I hope you look at your life very differently through the lens that David just gave you, because it isn't a frantic thing. It's actually a blessing to be able to integrate. I love that word, much better than balance. I hate balance. It doesn't exist.
I mean, it does. For employees, that's the only way they can think, and that's unfortunate because the ideal exists, but it's impossible, right?
Yeah, that's
It's sort of like being holy, right? Being sinless. It's a great ideal.
Yeah.
Nobody's gonna hit it,
Nobody-
right?
no,
Nobody.
sorry.
It's like perfection. Great idea. Nobody's gonna hit it.
No, it's not possible. Yeah. Okay. All right. So like I said, I could just keep talking to you all day long. But so all right. So you've covered some really wonderful actual tools and tactics, which we all need. We can sit here and spout esoteric and wisdom up our you-know-whats, but actually getting to put plans to action are what create businesses, not ideas. So anything beyond that let's say someone's still out there in wonderful podcast land and they're going, wow, this is amazing. I think I might be able to do this, but I'm not quite sure. And they're just kind of rocking back and forth going, gosh, I really want to do this. And I think I can do that integration thing. What advice would you give that person?
So, we spent probably the bulk of this time talking about the cutback idea, right? And I think even if you're an employee, that applies, right? Cut back as much as you can. There's actually, I know this from being an employee for like a decade, there's a lot of stuff that your company asks you to do that they don't actually check whether or not you're doing, right? Or that if you came to them and said, hey, I actually think this is outside of my strength zone. Is there somebody else who could, they'd help you, right? So cut back is one. The beautiful thing is when you cut back and you have that excess capacity, you can take what a friend of mine, Peter Sims, always coins as little bets. You can start all sorts of little trials. And I think those trials are perfect. Now the trendy term is side hustle, right? But I always just consider them little bets. I'm going to try this little thing. I'm going to see how it works out. Right. And what a lot of people think about is taking this huge leap. And I don't think you do that. I think you take little bets, you learn something, you course correct. I think you use any revenue from your little bet businesses to pay down debt so that when you take the leap, it's way easier. And then eventually, if you keep experimenting, changing, morphing, et cetera, eventually you'll get to the point, again, like I did with the professor thing, where it was like, it doesn't make financial sense for me to continue being an employee of this institution because this business over here is cranking. It makes way more sense to do some sort of alternative arrangement. So I don't think you take a big leap. I think you cut back, then you take some little bets, and then eventually the leap will be inevitable. Like there will be a time. Well, there's an old Anais Nin quote about like eventually the risks of becoming a blossom outweighed the risks of staying in the bud or something like that. I'm ruining this quote because it's been a while since I was an English major. Your son could probably tell me. But it's essentially that idea that eventually there'll be a time where staying where you are is the more risky path. And I think until you get to that point, you just little bet, you build, you change your business model when it needs to be, and you grow slowly. And then that time comes, and then it's not even a leap. Then it's like, duh, I have to do this.
Total no-brainer. Yes.
And then you do the work-life integration thing because now you can, because it's your business, and then life is pretty good.
Yeah. And, you may not be able to do work-life integration immediately because sometimes being out of balance is fine. Sometimes putting more energy into one rather than the other is necessary. Like I'm sure during the Super Connector Summit, you had some times when you were not always as available as you were when you weren't doing the Super Connector Summit.
Right. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. It's not all rosy and perfect, and it's just
I mean that was my average day. That wasn't my everyday. Let's put it that way, right? But also, when you have the ability to invest that much, it's not that big a deal, right? Because you can pull more time from that, and then you can do other awesome things. Like my wife and I were literally talking about this the other day. There's this. I mean, your son is too old for this. I don't. But for toddlers, there's this amazing hotel called Great Wolf Lodge that is a hotel and a water park. And we were talking about how much we love it, but we hate the crowds. And then it occurred to us of like, well, why don't we just pull them out of school for like 2 days and take them on like a Tuesday and a Wednesday, and then there's no crowds. Yes. And we can do that, right? And because we can do that. Fast forward 2 weeks, it's not that big a deal if dad's hiding in the studio till 8 p.m. because he has to record all these interviews,
Exactly. It's a trade-off both ways. Yes. It's an amazing life. Oh my gosh. It is an amazing life that you can create, and it's yours, not dictated by someone else. It is yours, and you put in the time, you make the sacrifices, you enjoy the benefits because of the fact that it's yours. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love
and
it.
that's, I mean, one of the best things I've ever heard someone say is that you look at all those people that have their sort of like dream job, and 95% of the time, there's no job application for dream job. Like you can't go to monster.com and search dream job. Those people built it, and it took a while. Yep. But eventually it turns into that thing that's the dream job.
Yes. And I love the little bets. I look at them as experiments. Let's just experiment over here. We're not taking our entire life savings and dumping it into something that's really risky, and we don't know whether it's going to work or not. And we don't even know if anybody wants the thing. They're just little bets. They're just little experiments. Let's experiment, see if it works.
Oh, yeah, no, totally. I mean, the summits are experiments, right? The summit that you were on was an experiment. I've played around with some online courses, right? I keep finding that people appreciate my long form writing and my speaking most. So that's where the most of the revenue in the business comes from. But almost every time there's sort of a new medium for content, I'm going to do an experiment in it and see if it's worthwhile. And a lot of them aren't, but that's fine. Some of them are, and they turn into like the summit. They turn into a pretty cool little extra revenue stream.
Yeah, definitely. And you never know where they're going to lead, no matter what. Just like we talked about, and Power Parents, if you want to go check out Super Connector Summit, I'm sure if you go to the show notes page, we'll have a link to show you what it was all about. But it is connections. It is building connections with others and being able to maximize those connections on both sides, not just for your benefit, but for both sides. And that kind of takes me into your book. We started this whole conversation of author of a friend of a friend. What in the world is that about?
Yeah. So friend of a friend, I mean, it builds on the ideas of the Super Connector Summit. There's a lot of networking and making connections books out there, and almost all of them are advice. And advice is kind of not that valuable. Advice, I mean, first of all, advice is autobiographical, right?
Yes.
So if you understand where that person's coming from, who they are, what they were looking for, et cetera, then there's a story there that is probably helpful. But you cannot just carbon copy their advice. It's probably not going to work unless you are a carbon copy of that person. And so I looked at this space, and so that's like problem one, right? Problem two is that there is this actual field in the world called network science. We've been studying it for like 60 years, and it's all about who is connected to who and how they work and how networks work, essentially. And that realm is chock full of advice for how you think about the network that you're in and who your connections are and what connections you need to make and all that sort of stuff. But there was nobody crossing the chasm, if you will. And so that's the goal. So that's what Friend of a Friend is. Friend of a Friend is a book that uses social science and network science to actually lay out, here are the universal truths about networks and making connections, not people's advice about how to work a room or who you should invite to lunch or those sort of things.
Mm-hmm. Wow. All right. So the Power Parents know that I'm working on a book called The Message. And now I'm basically saying that I'm going to, once Friend of a Friend comes out, use some of those tools and reference your process, your book, because it builds right on that idea that each of those connections we make, each of the opportunities that come to us is a message, and we have to choose whether or not to reply to it. And that exactly what you said will help us understand whether or not we should reply. Wow, I can't wait. So when is that coming out?
So that comes out May 1st of 2018. We're going to seed out a lot of content throughout this year. So the best thing to do, I guess, right now is go to davidburkus.com, and right on the very top of the page is this little thing that says, how can I help you? And one of the options is I want to grow my network. Click that. There's already some resources, and there'll be more that we're dripping out as we get closer to launch dates. So don't wait for the book. Just start getting that content now.
And
when the book comes out, please buy it in like triplicate. But for now, don't wait for that.
And your friends and your grandmother. Yes.
Right. Yeah. Buy it for your friend and your friend of a friend.
Yes,
yeah, exactly.
And Power Parents, I can tell you from personal experience, you need to have David in your world. You need to be connected to what he has to say, because it is, I'm just going to tell you that, because it's very important. And he will, as you've already heard from this podcast, not just advice, but actual steps, actionable things that you can take in your day and impact your world. So, David, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for sharing your time, your sense of humor, your stories. I really, truly cannot wait for what's to come.
Yeah, no, and thank you again so much for having me. This was great.
To get powered up for your day, just go to parentepower.com and listen to the over 200 episodes we have so far with amazing entrepreneurs just like you. It might just help you feel like a grown-up again.